My family ambushed me at dinner, announcing my brother would be taking my room. They all laughed, expecting me to pack my bags. I just smiled, because what they had conveniently forgotten was that my name was on the deed, and my lawyer was already drafting their eviction papers. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The oppressive weight of the week was still clinging to my shoulders as I pulled into the driveway of La Belle Vie, a restaurant my family could never have afforded on their own. As a financial analyst, the end of the quarter was always a brutal, soul-crushing marathon of spreadsheets and projections. I was exhausted, running on fumes and the lukewarm coffee that had been my primary source of nutrition for the past 72 hours. All I wanted was a quiet evening, a simple meal, and perhaps a flicker of the familial warmth I always hoped was just around the corner, despite years of evidence to the contrary. My mother, Brenda, had called 3 times that day to confirm I was coming. "It's a very special night, Georgia," she'd chirped, her voice laced with an excitement that rarely involved me. "We're celebrating Leo's promotion. You have to be there." Leo, my younger brother, was the sun around which our family's universe orbited. His every minor achievement was cause for a parade, his every whim a royal decree. His promotion from junior marketing associate to marketing executive was, in my mother's eyes, akin to a Nobel Prize nomination. I was genuinely happy for him, of course, but the forced fanfare always felt a little hollow, a little rehearsed. Still, I had put on my nicest dress, a simple navy blue sheath that felt professional and understated, and drove 40 minutes across town to play my part. I found them at a large, circular table in the center of the opulent dining room. My father, Richard, gave me a brief, distracted nod, his attention already returning to the wine list. My mother was beaming, her hand resting proudly on Leo's shoulder. Leo, looking smug and handsome in a suit that was just a little too tight, was holding court, regaling them with a story about his brilliance in the boardroom. "Georgia, you made it," my mother exclaimed, as if my arrival were a delightful surprise rather than a mandated appearance. She gestured to the empty seat beside her, the one furthest from Leo. I slid into it, the plush velvet doing little to make me feel comfortable. The dinner proceeded as expected. A toast to Leo, another toast to Leo, a detailed 5-minute monologue from my mother about the signs of genius she'd spotted in him as a toddler. My father chimed in with anecdotes about Leo's high school football days. I ate my sea bass in silence, offering a polite smile or a nod when the conversation required it. I felt less like a family member and more like a member of the audience, a seat filler at an awards show for one. "You know, with this promotion comes a bigger salary," Leo said, puffing out his chest. "And more responsibility. I'll need a proper home office. A space where I can really focus, you know? My room is just too cramped." My mother seized the opening like a hawk swooping on its prey. She placed her fork down with a delicate clink, a theatrical gesture designed to capture everyone's attention. "We've been thinking about that, haven't we, Richard?" My father grunted his assent, his eyes still on his plate. Brenda's gaze swept across the table and landed on me. There was a predatory gleam in her eyes, a triumphant smile playing on her lips that sent a shiver of dread down my spine. This was it, the real reason for the dinner. I wasn't just an audience member, I was a prop in the final act. "Georgia, darling," she began, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You've been so wonderful, staying at home all these years, helping out. But you're 28 now. You have a great career. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet, don't you think?" The air in my lungs turned to ice. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, where this was headed. "Leo needs a bigger space," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "He needs a room that reflects his new status. Your room is the largest, Georgia. It gets the best light. It would make a perfect office for him." The table fell silent. Leo was smirking into his water glass. My father was studiously examining a bread roll. My mother's smile was wide, expectant. "So," she announced, her voice booming with cheerful finality, "we've decided. It's time for you to move out. Leo will take your room. We'll help you look for a little apartment somewhere. It's a win-win." Then came the laughter. It started with Leo, a low, condescending chuckle. My mother joined in, a high-pitched titter. Even my father managed a weak, wheezing laugh. They were laughing at me, at the absurdity in their minds that I would have any objection. They were laughing at the brilliant simplicity of their plan, a plan that solved Leo's problem entirely at my expense. They looked at me, their faces flush with wine and victory, waiting for me to join in, to accept my demotion with a good-natured shrug. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears like a cruel taunt. For years, I had been the responsible one, the quiet pillar, the one who fixed things when they broke. I had sacrificed, I had saved, I had supported them in ways they couldn't even comprehend. And this was my reward. To be publicly discarded, my home, my space, my security, given away to my brother like a hand-me-down toy he had suddenly decided he wanted. I looked at their laughing faces, at the casual cruelty of it all. They saw me as a temporary fixture, a placeholder in my own life. A knot of cold, hard resolve formed in the pit of my stomach. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I met my mother's gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet but steady. Their laughter subsided, replaced by relieved smiles. They had won. They thought I had folded as I always did. They mistook my silence for submission, my nod for agreement, but they were wrong. They had forgotten the most important detail, a secret I had held close for 5 long years. They saw a doormat. They had no idea they were speaking to their landlord. The betrayal was sharper and more painful than any physical blow. The car ride home was a masterclass in suffocating silence. My parents and Leo chattered on in the front seat, their conversation buzzing with plans for Leo's new office suite. They discussed paint colors, desk placements, and whether he should get a standing desk or a more traditional mahogany one. It was as if I wasn't there, a ghost in the back seat of my own car. Because, of course, we had taken my car, the reliable sedan I had purchased with my own money, because my father's car was in the shop again. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into long, meaningless streaks. Each cheerful mention of George's old room felt like a tiny paper cut on my soul. They weren't just taking a room, they were erasing me. They were erasing the 16 years I had spent within those 4 walls, the place where I had studied for exams, cried over heartbreaks, and dreamed of a future they were now casually dismantling. When we arrived home, the charade of celebration continued. My mother bustled into the kitchen to make tea, while Leo immediately went upstairs. I heard his footsteps moving around directly above the living room, in my bedroom. He was pacing it out, claiming his territory before I had even had a chance to process the eviction notice served over dessert. My father sank into his favorite armchair and picked up the newspaper, effectively vanishing behind a wall of print. He had played his part, provided the silent, masculine endorsement of his wife's decree, and was now absolved of any further emotional responsibility. That was his specialty, passive complicity. I stood in the entryway, my purse still looped over my shoulder, feeling like an intruder in the house I had saved. A wave of nausea washed over me. I needed air. I walked to the back door and stepped out onto the patio. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the stuffy atmosphere inside. I leaned against the railing, listening to the distant hum of the highway, and tried to regulate my breathing. This wasn't just about a room. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of being treated as secondary, functional, and ultimately disposable. Leo was the project, I was the scaffolding. And now that the project was nearing what they considered a masterpiece, the scaffolding was being torn down. A few minutes later, my mother slid the glass door open. "There you are," she said, her voice devoid of the earlier feigned sweetness. It was flat, businesslike. "I was just saying to your father, this is for the best, Georgia. It will be good for you, force you to grow up a little." "I'm grown up, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I have a career. I pay my own bills. Yes, well, living at home at your age is a bit stalled, don't you think? She said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. Your friends all have their own places. It's time. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She wasn't pushing me out of the nest for my own good. She was throwing me out to make room for her favorite. Leo is so excited, she went on, oblivious to my inner turmoil. He's already got ideas from a design magazine. He thinks a nice charcoal gray on the walls would look very professional. I just stared at her. At the woman who was my mother, who was supposed to protect me, but who was instead the architect of my humiliation. There was no empathy in her eyes, no flicker of understanding for what she was doing. There was only the placid satisfaction of a problem solved. Leo's problem. I'll start looking for apartments tomorrow, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My compliance seemed to please her. Good girl, she said, patting my arm condescendingly. That's the spirit. Don't worry, we'll help you pack. She turned and went back inside, leaving me alone in the dark. I stayed out there for a long time, letting the cold seep into my bones. They moved with such effortless entitlement, rearranging my life as if it were furniture. They saw my contributions, my sacrifices, as nothing more than my duty, my rent for existing in their orbit. But their plans, their laughter, their entire comfortable world, it was all built on a foundation they didn't own. They had completely and utterly forgotten who held the deed, and that single, crucial fact was about to change everything. The next morning, the assault continued. I woke up to find a stack of brochures for rental apartments on my bedside table. My mother had circled several listings in neighborhoods I could barely afford, all of them tiny one-bedroom units far from my work. A little note was attached, written in her loopy, cheerful script. Some ideas to get you started. XO, Mom. Later that afternoon, I came home from a grocery run to find Leo in my room with a tape measure. He was measuring the wall where my bed stood, a thoughtful frown on his face. Do you think a 72-inch desk is too much for this wall? He asked, not as a question to me, but as if I were a ghost he was thinking aloud to. I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway, watching him. He was so completely absorbed in his vision, so confident in his claim to my space, that he didn't even register the cold fury radiating from me. He was a prince surveying his new dominion. I closed the door quietly and went to my office downstairs, a small, cramped room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. It was where I worked, where I managed my finances, and where I kept the documents that mattered. I knelt and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pushed aside files labeled taxes and investments until my fingers found the one I was looking for. It was a thick accordion folder labeled simply, House. I pulled it out and placed it on my desk. My hands were trembling slightly as I opened the clasp. Inside, nestled amongst insurance papers and property tax receipts, was the quitclaim deed. Dated 5 years ago, signed by Richard and Brenda Miller, transferring full ownership of the property at 42 Evergreen Lane to their daughter, Georgia Miller. My name, my house. They thought they were kicking me out. They were about to discover they were squatters. The memory of the day the house became mine was seared into my brain, not with the triumph of ownership, but with the quiet desperation that had led to it. It was 6 years ago. I was 22, barely a year out of college, and just starting to find my footing as a junior analyst at a downtown firm. I was working 60-hour weeks, fueled by cheap coffee and the burning ambition to build a life for myself, to finally get my own apartment and taste real independence. That dream came crashing down during a phone call with my mother. Her voice was thin and tight with a panic she was trying desperately to conceal. The contracting business my father ran had hit a rough patch, a patch that had turned into a catastrophic collapse. A major client had declared bankruptcy without paying, leaving my father with massive material costs and payroll he couldn't meet. They had taken out a second mortgage years ago to expand the business, and now, with no income, the bank was threatening foreclosure. I came home that weekend to a house cloaked in a palpable sense of dread. My mother's perpetual smile was gone, replaced by a permanent frown. My father, a man who had always seemed so large and confident, looked shrunken, defeated. He spent his days on the phone, arguing with suppliers and pleading with the bank, his voice getting quieter with each failed call. Leo, who was 19 at the time, dealt with the stress by staying out late with friends, treating the house like a hotel, and avoiding the heavy, anxious atmosphere. The first foreclosure notice arrived in a certified letter. I was the one who signed for it. I watched my mother open it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tear the envelope. She read it, and then she crumpled, sobbing at the kitchen table. That was the moment I made a choice. My dreams of a sunny downtown apartment, of weekend brunches and decorating my own space, could wait. My family was about to lose everything. I sat down with my parents that night with my laptop and all my bank statements. I walked them through my salary, my savings, and my own meticulously planned budget. I can help, I told them. I laid out a plan. I would move my savings into their account to cover the immediate arrears. I would take over the monthly mortgage payments. I would set up a payment plan with the utility companies. My entire salary, minus the bare minimum I needed for gas and personal expenses, would go toward keeping them afloat. My mother cried with relief, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. My father, his pride wounded but his desperation greater, just nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Just until I get back on my feet," he mumbled. Getting back on his feet took years. The business never recovered. He eventually took a job as a foreman for another company, earning a fraction of what he used to, and I kept paying. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes. I paid for the new water heater when the old one burst. I paid for my mother's dental surgery. I paid for Leo's car insurance. My name became a permanent fixture on every bill. About a year into this arrangement, I realized the precariousness of my situation. I was pouring my entire financial future into an asset that wasn't legally mine. If anything happened to my parents, the house, along with my investment, would be tied up in probate. And with Leo as the favored child, I had no doubt who they would have willed it to. I sought advice from a pro bono legal clinic. A kind, elderly lawyer listened to my story and told me, in no uncertain terms, that I needed to protect myself. He suggested a quitclaim deed. It was the simplest way to transfer ownership. Broaching the subject with my parents was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My mother was instantly defensive. "It's like you don't trust us, Georgia," she'd said, her voice sharp with indignation. "It's not about trust," I explained calmly, repeating the lawyer's words. "It's a formality, for the bank, for tax purposes. It makes things cleaner since I'm the one making all the payments. Nothing will change. It will still be our home." It took weeks of gentle persuasion. My father, ever practical when it came to legal matters, finally saw the logic. He convinced my mother. We went to a notary's office one Tuesday afternoon. They signed the papers with grim faces. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 days after. To them, it was a humiliating piece of paperwork, a symbol of their failure. To me, it was a shield. Over the next 5 years, life settled into a new normal. I received promotions at work, my salary grew, and the financial burden eased. But the family dynamic had crystallized. I was the provider, the reliable, invisible engine that kept the household running. Leo, meanwhile, graduated college and drifted through a series of cool jobs with little responsibility, all while being praised for his potential. My parents, freed from the crushing weight of debt, seemed to develop a selective amnesia about how they'd been saved. The house was once again their house. My role as its savior was conveniently forgotten, and I was relegated back to the role of the permanent, dutiful daughter living under their roof. Now, as I looked at the deed in my hands, their behavior at the restaurant made a new, horrifying kind of sense. They hadn't just forgotten my sacrifice, they had consciously erased it. In their minds, my ownership was a temporary legal fiction, a detail that could be ignored now that it was inconvenient. They truly believed they had the right to give my room, in my house, to my brother. They saw Leo as the future, the rising star who deserved the best. I was just the past, a debt that had been paid and could now be dismissed. The polished, disingenuous smiles, the vague talk of my future, my mother's pointed comments, it was all a performance to manage their own guilt while they took what they wanted. Leo, with his smirking sense of privilege, was the perfect beneficiary of their delusion. He had never had to sacrifice anything, and he had learned from them that he never would. He was the golden child, and he was about to get his golden office, built upon the foundation of my life's work. The turning point didn't come with a crash of thunder, but with the soft, insidious sound of cardboard scraping against a wood floor. It was Saturday, 2 days after the dinner. I was working in my small office, trying to distract myself with complex financial models, when I heard the noises from the hallway upstairs. A soft thump, a scraping sound, a murmur of voices, my mother and Leo. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. I muted my conference call and crept up the stairs. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar. I peered through the crack. What I saw sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated rage through me. My mother was holding a black trash bag, stuffing my old high school track trophies into it. Leo was taking books off my bookshelf and piling them haphazardly into a cardboard box labeled George's junk. They weren't just planning to kick me out. They were starting without me. They were treating my possessions, the artifacts of my life, as clutter to be cleared away. Just put it all in boxes, my mother was saying. She can sort through it when she finds a place. We need to get this room cleared out so the painters can come in on Monday. Monday? They had scheduled painters for Monday. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking disrespect, snapped something inside me. The part of me that had always sought peace, that had always swallowed my hurt for the sake of family harmony, simply vanished. It was replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I was no longer a victim. I was the owner of the property, and my tenants were out of control. I backed away from the door before they could see me, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. I went back to my office, but not to work. I pulled out the file folder labeled house. I took out the deed and stared at my name, printed in clear, unambiguous letters. Georgia Miller. This was my home, my castle, and it was time to fortify the walls. My first call was to a man named Arthur Vance. He was a partner at a well-respected law firm downtown, specializing in real estate and property law. I had been referred to him by a senior vice president at my company. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Georgia Miller. I own a property, and the current occupants, who happen to be my family, are refusing to acknowledge my ownership and are attempting to remove me from my own room. I need to understand the legal process for eviction in this state." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Well, Ms. Miller," he finally said, his voice calm and professional, "that is certainly a unique situation. Let's talk it through." For the next hour, Arthur became my strategist. He was methodical, direct, and entirely unsentimental. He confirmed what I already knew. The signed and recorded quitclaim deed was ironclad. The house was mine, and mine alone. My parents and brother were, in the eyes of the law, tenants at will. They had no lease and paid no rent, which meant I had the right to terminate their tenancy with proper notice. "The key here is to do everything by the book," he advised. "No emotional outbursts. No dramatic confrontations until you have your ducks in a row. The law is on your side, but you must follow procedure to the letter. It will make your position unassailable." He laid out the plan. First, he would draft a formal notice to quit. This legal document would inform my family that their tenancy was being terminated and give them the statutory 30 days to vacate the premises. Second, we would have it delivered by a professional process server. This would prevent them from claiming they never received it. Third, if they refused to leave after 30 days, we would file an unlawful detainer lawsuit, and the sheriff would physically remove them. "It sounds harsh," Arthur said gently, "but their actions have forced your hand. You are protecting your asset." His words were like a balm to my frayed nerves. He wasn't judging me. He was validating my position. This wasn't a petty family squabble, it was a legal and financial matter. I was no longer Georgia, the overlooked daughter. I was Ms. Miller, the property owner, and I was taking back control. "Draft the notice," I said, my voice firm. "I want it served on Monday morning." After the call, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The clever trap wasn't something I had to set, it was the truth they had chosen to ignore. My investigation wasn't about uncovering some dark secret of theirs. It was about arming myself with the clear, cold power of the law. I spent the rest of the weekend playing the part of the compliant, defeated daughter. When my mother mentioned the boxes in the hall, I just nodded and said, "Thanks for the help." When Leo asked if I had called any of the apartments from the brochures, I said I would get to it on Monday. They mistook my quiet diligence for meek acceptance. They had no idea that in my small office, I was reviewing legal NTS, wiring a retainer to Arthur Vance's firm, and preparing for a war they didn't even know had been declared. They were busy planning the redecoration of a single room. I was busy planning the reclamation of the entire house. They thought they held all the power, but they had forgotten that true power doesn't come from being the loudest person in the room. It comes from holding the deed. Monday morning arrived with a palpable sense of tension. The painters were scheduled to arrive at 10 o'clock to give an estimate for Leo's new office. My mother was buzzing around the house, a whirlwind of nervous energy, tidying things that were already tidy. Leo had taken the day off work to oversee the project, and he was lounging at the kitchen island, scrolling through paint swatches on his tablet. I, on the other hand, was a picture of calm. I made my coffee, toasted a bagel, and sat down at the table as if it were any other day. I knew the process server was scheduled to arrive between 9 and 9:30. My role was simple: be present, be quiet, and let the legal machinery I had set in motion do its work. At 9:15, the doorbell rang. "That'll be the painters," my mother called out, wiping her hands on her apron as she bustled toward the door. "Leo, come on, they're early." Leo sauntered into the hallway behind her. I remained at the kitchen table, slowly sipping my coffee, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. This was it. My mother pulled open the door, her face arranged in a welcoming smile. The man on the doorstep was not a painter. He was a stocky man in a nondescript polo shirt, holding a clipboard and a large manila envelope. "Brenda Miller?" he asked, his voice flat and official. My mother's smile faltered. "Yes." "This is for you," he said, handing her the envelope. "And I have one for Richard Miller and one for Leo Miller." My father, drawn by the unfamiliar voice, had appeared from the living room. Leo craned his neck, a look of confusion on his face. "What is this?" my father asked, taking his envelope from the man. Leo accepted his as well. "You've been served," the man said simply. He made a checkmark on his clipboard, turned, and walked back down the path to his car. My mother closed the door slowly, her eyes wide with confusion. The three of them stood in the hallway, staring at the official-looking envelopes in their hands. "What on earth?" my mother murmured, tearing hers open. My father and Leo followed suit. I heard the rustle of thick paper. Then, a sharp intake of breath from my mother. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Notice to quit. 30 days to vacate the premises." She looked up from the paper, her eyes wild with disbelief, and they landed directly on me. I was still sitting at the table, watching them over the rim of my coffee mug. "Georgia," my father said, his voice a low rumble of confusion. "What is the meaning of this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Leo's face was a mask of arrogant disbelief. "A joke? This is from a law firm. She hired a lawyer. You hired a lawyer against your own family," he spat, waving the document at me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee before I spoke. I met my mother's furious gaze. "It's not a joke," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's a legal notice. I thought it would be better to handle this formally." "Handle what?" my mother cried, storming into the kitchen. She threw the papers down on the table in front of me. There is nothing to handle. We are giving you plenty of time to find a new place. How dare you do this? You seem to be operating under a misapprehension, I said, placing my mug down carefully. This was the first reveal, the first crack I was placing in their delusional world. You can't kick me out, because you can't kick someone out of their own house. My father scoffed. Don't be ridiculous, Georgia. This is our house. No, Dad, I said, shaking my head slowly. It's not anymore. It hasn't been for 5 years. Leo let out a short, bark-like laugh. Oh, I see what this is. This is about that silly paperwork from years ago. The formality to help with the bank. You can't possibly think that means anything. It means everything, Leo, I replied, my voice hardening. It's called a quitclaim deed. It means Mom and Dad legally signed the ownership of this property over to me. I hold the title. I pay the mortgage. I pay the taxes. This house, I said, gesturing around the kitchen, is my asset, and you 3 are my tenants. The color drained from my mother's face. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if he were trying to process a foreign language. The legal document in his hand suddenly seemed much heavier. Brenda's shock quickly curdled into rage. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her face inches from mine. You ungrateful little snake, she hissed. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a roof over your head. No. I corrected her, my voice dropping to a steely quiet. I gave you a roof over your heads. I saved this house from foreclosure when you were about to lose everything. That silly paperwork was the only thing protecting the money I poured into this place to keep you from being homeless. Leo's smirk had vanished, replaced by a sneer. So what, you're going to throw your own family out on the street? Over a bedroom? That's pathetic, even for you. You're not being thrown out over a bedroom, Leo, I said, standing up to face them. You're being asked to leave because you have shown me, in no uncertain terms, that you have zero respect for me or for what I have done. You treated me like a servant and an obstacle. You decided my home was yours to reallocate as you saw fit. You are not being evicted. Your tenancy is being terminated. The doorbell rang again. It was the painters. My mother just stared at it, speechless. The world she had so carefully constructed, where she was the benevolent matriarch and I was the dutiful child, had been shattered by a single, undeniable fact. Her threats, her anger, her theatrical indignation, they were useless. She was shouting at her landlord, and her lease was up. The week that followed the serving of the notice was a cold war fought within the walls of my own home. My family reacted not with introspection or regret, but with a desperate, clumsy escalation of tactics. They swung wildly between emotional blackmail and outright denial, refusing to accept the new reality. My mother's strategy was to try and weaponize guilt. She would corner me in the hallway, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. How could you do this to your father and me, Georgia? We're your parents. We could be out on the street. Is that what you want? To see us homeless? I want you to respect my legal ownership of my property, I would reply calmly, refusing to take the bait. You have 24 days left to find alternative housing. My father, on the other hand, adopted a policy of hostile silence. He would pointedly ignore me, walking out of a room the moment I entered. If he had to acknowledge me, it was with a glare of pure contempt. He saw my actions not as a defense of my property, but as the ultimate act of familial betrayal. He, the patriarch who had failed to provide, could not stand to be reminded that his daughter was the one who had saved and now controlled everything. Leo was perhaps the most infuriating. His arrogance returned, mutated into a kind of defiant petulance. He acted as if the eviction notice was a temporary inconvenience, a tantrum I would soon get over. He continued to talk about his new office, and one afternoon I came home to find him on the phone with a furniture company, trying to arrange a delivery date for a new desk. They can deliver it on the 20th, he announced to the room at large. That should give Georgia plenty of time to clear out her stuff. I walked over, took the phone from his hand, and canceled the order. You will not be moving any new furniture into my house, Leo, I said, my voice dangerously low. You seem to be confused. You are leaving. You are not redecorating." His face flushed with anger, but for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in his eyes. The reality was starting to penetrate his thick skull. The case I was building with my lawyer, Arthur, wasn't just about the eviction anymore. It became about preparing for their next move. Arthur warned me that they might try to contest the deed, claiming they signed it under duress. "This is where your diligence becomes your shield," he told me during a call. "Do you have records of the mortgage payments you've made?" "I have every single one," I said. "Property tax receipts. In a file organized by year. Major repairs, the water heater you mentioned, the roof repairs from 2 years ago. I have the invoices and the canceled checks for all of it." That evening, I did something I hadn't intended to do. I was sorting through old bank statements for Arthur when I overheard my parents in the living room. They were speaking in low, urgent whispers, thinking I was out. "There has to be a way," my mother was saying. "We can't just leave. This is our home. We could sell it. We could get a great price in this market." My blood ran cold. My father's voice was weary. "Brenda, she holds the title. We have no legal claim." "Don't be so sure," she shot back. "I was talking to Martha down the street. Her son is a lawyer. He said we could argue we were misled, that she took advantage of us when we were vulnerable. We could get the house back, Richard, sell it, split the money, and be done with her. Leo could get a down payment for a condo." There it was, the final, shocking confirmation of their intentions. It wasn't just about a room. It wasn't even just about having a place to live. It was about liquidating my asset, the home I had worked tirelessly to save and maintain, and cutting me out of the picture entirely. They wanted to cash in on my years of sacrifice and use the profits to further bankroll their golden child. That was the last piece of proof I needed. My lingering, microscopic shred of doubt about whether I was doing the right thing evaporated in that instant. The next evening, I called a family meeting. I told them to be in the living room at 7 o'clock. No excuses. They gathered reluctantly, sitting opposite me on the sofa, a united front of simmering resentment. I remained standing. "I know this has been a difficult time," I began, my voice devoid of emotion. "And I know you feel this is unfair. So I want to present you with some information, just so we are all perfectly clear on the facts." I placed a thick binder on the coffee table between us. I had spent the previous night compiling it. "This," I said, tapping the cover, "is a complete financial history of this house for the past 6 years." I opened it to the first page. "Here is a copy of the first foreclosure notice you received. And here," I said, turning the page, "are the bank statements showing the transfer from my savings account to yours to prevent the immediate seizure of the property. The amount, if you recall, was $32,000, my entire life savings at the time." I turned the page again. "Here is a ledger of every single mortgage payment made since that day, all drawn from my personal bank account. A total of 72 consecutive payments amounting to over $200,000. I continued, page after damning page. Property tax receipts, homeowners insurance payments, the $5,000 invoice for the new roof, the $2,000 bill for the emergency plumbing work, all paid by me. When I was finished, I closed the binder. "This house is not an emotional concept," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "It is a financial asset, an asset that you had forfeited and that I purchased through years of work and sacrifice." Then I looked directly at my mother. "And just yesterday, I heard you discussing your plans to take this asset from me, sell it, and use the money to set Leo up in a condo. You weren't just trying to kick me out of my room. You were planning to steal my entire investment, my entire future." The silence in the room was absolute. My mother's face was ashen. My father stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. Leo looked from his parents to me, the smugness finally, completely gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. The spell was broken. The irrefutable, black-and-white proof of their breathtaking entitlement was sitting on the table, and there was nothing they could say to deny it. The final showdown didn't happen with shouting or tears. It happened with the quiet, mundane rumble of a moving truck. The 30-day notice period was set to expire on a Friday. On the Wednesday of that final week, I came home from work to find a large, yellow rental truck parked in the driveway. My father and Leo were on the front lawn, arguing over how to best use a dolly to move the heavy, antique sideboard from the dining room. My mother was directing the operation from the porch, a clipboard in hand, looking stressed but determined. They had clearly decided to wait until the last possible moment, perhaps holding out hope that I would cave. When they saw my car pull in, they all froze. The argument stopped. My mother's face hardened. This was their final act of defiance. They were moving, yes, but on their own terms, portraying themselves as the victims of my cold-hearted, legalistic maneuvering. They were creating a public spectacle for the neighbors, a visual tableau of a poor, displaced family being forced from their home. I parked my car on the street, got out, and walked calmly up the driveway. I didn't say a word to them. I walked past the truck, past the scattered boxes on the lawn, and went into the house. I could feel their eyes on my back. I went straight to my office and made a phone call. Then, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of iced water, and waited. 5 minutes later, Leo stormed into the house. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Just going to walk past us like we don't exist. We're out here breaking our backs because of you." "You're moving out because your tenancy was terminated, Leo," I said without looking at him. "You've had 30 days to plan this. The fact that you left it to the last minute is not my problem." "This is unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head as he stalked back outside. Another 10 minutes passed. Then I saw it. A sleek, black town car pulled up to the curb behind the moving truck. Arthur Vance got out of the passenger side, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Following him was a man I recognized from a photo Arthur had sent me, Mr. Henderson, a professional real estate appraiser. I walked to the front door and opened it. "Arthur, Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming on such short notice," I said, my voice loud enough to carry across the lawn. My family stopped what they were doing and stared. The sight of a lawyer in a suit arriving at their chaotic moving scene was clearly not something they had anticipated. "Georgia," Arthur said, shaking my hand warmly. "Not a problem at all. Mr. Henderson is ready to begin the preliminary assessment whenever you are." My mother marched down the porch steps. "Assessment? What are you talking about? What is he doing here?" she demanded, her eyes wide with alarm. I turned to face her. My voice was calm, clear, and projected for everyone to hear, my parents, my brother, even the neighbors who were now peeking curiously from behind their curtains. "Well, Mom, since you, Dad, and Leo are finally vacating the premises, I'm moving forward with the next phase of my financial plan," I explained in a pleasant, conversational tone. "First, Mr. Henderson is here to conduct a full appraisal of the property. I need an updated valuation for insurance and tax purposes, of course." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I delivered the final, crushing blow. "Second, Arthur is here with some paperwork for you to sign before you leave. It's a standard rental arrears acknowledgement. I've decided not to pursue you for the 6 years of back rent you failed to pay, which, at current market rates, my accountant calculates at roughly $144,000. A collective gasp went through my family. Leo dropped the dolly, which clattered onto the concrete driveway. "However," I continued, my voice unwavering, "I do need you to sign a waiver acknowledging that you are vacating the property willingly at the termination of your tenancy, and that you forfeit any and all claims to the property or its assets. It's just a formality to make sure there are no legal complications down the line when I decide to sell the house." "Sell," my father choked out, his face pale. "You're selling the house." "Of course," I said with a breezy confidence I didn't entirely feel. Why would I want to live in a place with so many complicated memories? It makes more sense to liquidate the asset and reinvest the capital. My portfolio could use the diversification. That was the moment they finally, truly broke. The idea of me evicting them was one thing, but the idea of me calmly, strategically selling their home, the home they felt entitled to, the home they had just been planning to sell for their own gain, and turning it into pure, untouchable profit for myself was a consequence they had never, in their wildest dreams, considered. Leo stared at me, his mouth hanging open. The entitled prince, the golden child, looked utterly defeated. The grand promotion, the new office, the future his parents had promised him, it had all just evaporated on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. He looked at his parents, not with anger, but with a dawning, horrified realization of how completely they had misled him, how their arrogance and greed had led them all to this public, humiliating ruin. "But where will we go?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. The fight was gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic panic. I looked at her, at the woman who had laughed at the thought of making me homeless. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, sorrowful finality. "I believe you have a list of apartment brochures," I said quietly. "You left them on my nightstand a few weeks ago. Perhaps you should start there." Arthur stepped forward, holding out a pen and the documents on his clipboard. My father, looking 10 years older than he had that morning, walked over like a man in a trance and signed without a word. The aftermath was not loud, but deafeningly quiet. My family finished their move in a state of stunned, silent shock. There were no more accusations, no more tears, no more desperate attempts at manipulation. There was only the grim, methodical packing of boxes and the hollow sound of footsteps echoing in empty rooms. By Friday evening, they were gone. The yellow truck rumbled away down the street, and for the first time in my life, the house was truly, completely mine. The silence they left behind was vast and peaceful. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps soft on the hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the wall in my bedroom, not Leo's future office. The air felt lighter. A weight I hadn't even been fully aware I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. It was the weight of expectation, of being perpetually secondary, of having to fight for a place in a home I had single-handedly kept standing. Their downfall was swift and undignified. Without my financial support, they were forced to confront the reality of their means. They ended up in a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, the kind of place my mother would have turned her nose up at just a month prior. The grand furniture they had insisted on taking looked comically oversized and out of place in the cramped rooms. Their social stand-in. G, which my mother had curated so carefully, took a significant hit. Word travels fast in a small community, and the story of how they were evicted by their own daughter, though the details were fuzzy to outsiders, did not paint them in a favorable light. I didn't sell the house. My announcement on the lawn had been a strategic bluff, a final, necessary move to shatter their delusions of control. This house wasn't just an asset to be liquidated, it was my home. It was the proof of my strength, the result of my sacrifice. Reclaiming it was the point. I spent the next few months making it my own. I painted the walls in colors I loved, bought new furniture that suited my taste, and turned the cramped downstairs pantry office into a beautiful reading nook. I reclaimed my space, filling the silence not with loneliness, but with peace. About 2 months after the move, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Leo. His voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Georgia, it's me." "I know," I said. There was a long pause. I just wanted to say you were right," he finally managed, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, about everything. I never saw it, how much you were doing. They always just made it seem like you were the one who was lucky to be there. I was stupid. I'm sorry." It was the first genuine apology he had ever given me. He told me that living in the cramped apartment, watching his parents complain and struggle, had been a harsh wake-up call. He had finally seen their entitlement for what it was and his own complicity in it. "I'm getting my own place," he said. "A small studio, I don't want to be like them." It was a start. I accepted his apology, not with a promise that everything would go back to the way it was, but with an acknowledgement that something new might be possible. We began to talk, tentatively at first, building a new relationship, one based not on the toxic family hierarchy we grew up with, but on a fragile, newfound respect. I never reconciled with my parents. My mother tried to call a few times, her attempts to reconnect always circling back to her own perceived victimhood. My father never reached out at all. I realized that the relationship I had been trying to earn my whole life wasn't something I had ever truly possessed. I was mourning the loss of a family I had wanted, not the family I actually had. My justice wasn't loud or vengeful. It was the quiet, steady peace of my own home. It was the freedom to live my life without fighting for my own value. It was the calm of a Saturday morning, sitting in my sun-filled kitchen, sipping coffee from a mug that no one could take from me, in a house that was finally, unequivocally, a home. And it was more than enough.